you know. Um, so how many of you have ever heard of this saying? When one finger points at you, three fingers are pointing back. That's right. When you're pointing a finger at someone else, three fingers are pointing back at you. Now, here's the reality. And for those of you who are here for the first time or watching for the first time, we are doing a series called Repairing Broken Relationships. And again, just want to let you know that this is not a Ken original. I saw this and I thought this was really great. And I brought some of my Ken elements to it, but I thought, hey, I want to share this with the church because this has been such an encouragement to me, as well as from a guy named Andy Stanley. But here's the reality. When it comes to conflict, it does take two to tango, right? I know that's not a tango, but I have no idea what a tango is. But it's something like that. But it does. When it comes to conflict, it does take two to tango, unless, there is a caveat though, unless one of the people in the relationship is abusive. Because in that situation, they could tango all by themselves and create new dances like the electric slide or something. But, with that in mind, other than that, for typical relationships, when it comes to conflict, it does take two to tango. And so with that in mind, today, here's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at something called, as you can see on the screen, the blame pie. We're going to talk about the blame pie. And I think here's the reason, behind that is looking at the next part is every relationship has some kind of conflict. Everyone does. Everyone does. If your relationship has no conflicts, somebody's lying somewhere. Somebody is. Because every relationship has conflict. But here's the thing about the conflict, and it is true, that when it comes to, there's a proportion of when it comes to who's wrong or who's right in the relationship, right? And typically, here's what we say, right? They are which part? 87.5% wrong. I am the 12.5% that is correct. Hey, right? But here's what we're going to do today. Because let's be real, it's typically when we talk about who's right or who's wrong, what do we tend to focus on? They're 87.5%. So here's what we're going to do today is we are going to focus on our 12.5%. We're going to look at ourselves and look at other things that we could do that will allow our relationships to heal, where we could start with ourselves. And let's say, for example, the relationship doesn't heal. Let's say it's impossible for the relationship to be reconciled. Well, here's the problem, is if the relationship is never reconciled and I never do the work on myself, then I take those same patterns into me when it comes to other conflicts. So at least, if the relationship does not reconcile, at least I would have done the work in me to be able to learn how to navigate and work through that 12.5% so that I am healthier. And over the course of the series, we've talked about the pathway of insanity, right? And it's a pathway that we all tend to do when it comes to conflict. And that pathway ends up being, I argue with you, right, to try to convince you that you're wrong. So it kind of starts there. And then when I don't see that I'm winning the argument, I argue a little bit louder to convict you that I am wrong. And that conviction sometimes can be, after all I've done for you, it could be something along, but I try to convict you, try to pull you in. And then when that doesn't work, then I go for the strong guns. I argue a little bit louder because now I'm trying to coerce you into thinking that you are wrong. It's like a verbal headlock that I try to get you in. You are going to get this, right? So we yell louder. And then when that doesn't work, what do? We go to passive aggressive. We stop screaming, we stop yelling, and we become passive aggressive. Because maybe in being passive aggressive, I can control you into thinking that you're wrong. And in actuality, it doesn't work out, and we continue to go down this pathway of insanity. And I'm going to share something with you, and I'm going to be completely honest with you. You know, these series and this sermon has been very practical. This sermon series has been very practical in a lot of ways. But I'll tell you, I blew it this week. Like, I lost my temper. And, well, let's just say I lost my temper. So here's the reason why I tell you that is because I really want you to understand that this really is a process. It's going to take time to unlearn certain ways that you've reacted and that you've responded. It's going to take time to unlearn that when those certain buttons are pushed, to be able to figure out, well, how do I navigate this in a way to where I express what I'm really feeling, but to do so in a way where I still honor God in the process and not knock them out in the process as well. Like, how do I do that? And so it's going to, hopefully you're not knocking people out, but hopefully, you know, it will. It's going to take time, so don't be too hard on yourself when you do mess up. But what you can do is if you find yourself violating some of these things, you can go back and you can begin to look at, well, how could I have handled that differently? So that you'll continue to be able to grow and to challenge yourself to grow as well. And have you noticed that extroverts and introverts handle conflict differently? Have you noticed that? You know, the extrovert will like, you're done, you know, kind of thing, and that's how they're expressive, and their hands are moving, and, you know, that kind of thing. And the introvert will just shut down and done and spit in your coffee and then hand you the coffee. And you say, is that spit? And they'll say, no, it's frothing. Just swirl a little bit. Okay, hopefully you're not that bad as an introvert. Some of you are like, just one spit? But hopefully you're not that bad. But the thing is, when it comes to being able to see these changes in our lives, it's important that we're willing to do so, because if not, there's a couple of proverbs that can be used to describe us. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 8 says, the wise are glad to be instructed, but babbling fools fall flat on their faces. And I'll be honest, there have been times where I've argued, and I have been a babbling fool, right? And how about this one? Proverbs 10:14. Wise people treasure knowledge, but a babbling fool invites disaster. And, okay, let's be real with one another. Come on, lean in on this. Have there been times where you've been arguing, and in the argument, you realize, while doing the argument, you realize, I'm wrong. But, exactly. And I don't know if you guys heard what teachers, but you're too invested. So rather than go, I'm wrong, let's stop this, you double down and you argue harder, even though you know you were the one in the wrong. And again, as a result of that, it's just that the babbling fool will fall into disaster as a result of it. Now here's the thing. One of the things I think that hinders us from being able to deal with ourselves is it's called an excuse. Right? There are excuses that we have that we will utilize when there's a conflict that is happening. And sometimes what those excuses will do is they will cause us to not be willing to face ourselves, or cause us to not face ourselves. And I'm just going to share 3 of them. Here's the first one. I don't care. Right? I don't care. I don't care. You know, like I don't. I don't. But here's the reality. People who say they don't care, what? Do. Exactly. People who say they don't care do. But it's just kind of one of those defensive things that we do. Especially, we'll find ourselves using this when we have the argument, or we have the conflict, we have the difference, and we realize that what we do has no bearing on what they do. And because we are focused on their 87.5% rather than our 12.5%, we never work on ourselves. Because we know everything would be okay if they just work on themselves. And because they're not, and you see how my head's going, right? Because they ain't working on themselves, and I don't care. I don't care, right? Sorry about the little girlfriend just came out of me. But I don't care. How about this one? Here's another excuse that we've done this. Well, I tried. I tried. But did you really? And here's what I mean. When we say I tried, here's what we're really saying. I tried to help you work on your 87.5%, but you're so ignorant that you don't recognize what you... So I tried, but we never really worked on ourselves to grow, to develop. And it's almost like I don't care and I tried. They what? They kind of let us off the hook. Because again, the focus is on how they are wrong. And then there's the other one, which is, and this is a big one, well, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. If they would just, it's not my fault. If they just didn't, it's not my fault. And I will say, honestly, I think it is. It's easy to look at that 87.5% and feel like it's not your fault. But let's be real. Isn't it kind of always 87.5%? I mean, in reality, they're kind of always wrong. Now, maybe sometimes we might have a breakthrough and be honest with ourselves, but in reality, when it comes to percentage of the conflict, maybe it's not 87.5%. Maybe it's 50.9%. And I got that 49.1. But typically, we tend to look at the conflict as being a majority their fault. And if they're willing to do the work, then we would be better. But here's the answer to that issue of it's not my fault. The challenge of this series has been to look at conflict and our relationship with others from the perspective of Jesus Christ. And how did Jesus Christ handle conflict with us? And when you look at it from that perspective, what did he do? Because in reality, 0% wrong, right? Jesus is 0% wrong. I'm 100% wrong. 100% wrong. Yet the 0% left heaven. The 0% left comfort. The 0% left perfection to come and be with me in my 100% mess, to process with me and help me to kind of walk through what I need to walk through in order for me to heal, to forgive me, so that I need to walk through the things that I need to walk through to be able to heal. So the challenge is, because again, like I said before, sometimes when we say it's not my fault, we look at it as it's not my fault, I'm off the hook. Well, if it takes two to tango, and let's say they are 99% wrong, well, what do I do with my 1%? Let's begin to look at those elements so that we will begin to understand the need to work on ourselves. There's a question that Jesus asked that I think is really good and also really uncomfortable when it comes to how we navigate conflict. And he says this in Matthew chapter 7, verse 3. And why worry about the speck in your friend's eye when you have a what? Log in your own. Now, here's the thing that's really fun. I don't know if you know this, but in this passage, Jesus was actually cracking a joke. Because Hebrew humor was to use like the antithesis of something, and something really, really small, something really big. So when Jesus says, looking at the speck in their eye, when there's a log in your eye, people are like, ha, ha, oh, that's a good one, Jesus. Now, it doesn't sound really funny when I say it, because that's just not my humor. But Jesus was cracking a joke. But in cracking that joke, he was really making a point. Because, really, when we look at them, it's not a speck, is it? Sometimes it's like a telephone pole, in their eye. But What Jesus does here, though, is he really begins to challenge us to ask ourselves, why am I challenging them, the person I have a conflict with? Why am I challenging them to do something I'm not willing to do myself? Which is, look at myself. Well, Ken, they definitely have a log. I mean, come on, Ken. I mean, they're the ones that stole my idea. They're the ones who messed up. They're the ones who started the argument. They're the one who's stupid. You know? I mean, we could come through, and the reality is it is very easy to identify the log or the plank in someone else's eye. Very easy to do so. But come on, you've done this. Haven't there been times where you're talking to someone and they're saying something, and as they're saying it, like how they're messed up is so obvious to you. It's so obvious to you. But they don't get it. They just don't get it. Well, is it possible to flip the script? Where we're the ones who are struggling, who are messed up in some way, but we just don't get it? So I think Jesus is challenging us to be willing to look at the log in our eye. He goes on to say in Matthew chapter 7, verse 4, how can you think of saying to your friend, let me help you? Let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye when you can't see past the log in your own eye. And come on, I've said that, right? Help me help you. Help me help you. Or as my kids would say, you're the one with El Riz, and that's no cap. No. Look at my kids in the back. My kids are like, no. No. All right. So for those of you that are wondering, what did Ken just say? I was having fun with teen vernacular. And so really what I was saying is what we say to others, you're the one that's messed up, and that's no lie. You're the one that's messed up, and that's no lie. And so as we continue to look at the passage, it goes on and it says in Matthew chapter 7, verse 5, hypocrite, first get rid of the log in your eye, then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. Hypocrite. And it kind of is hypocritical, right? To say to someone, you need to work on yourself, but I'm not doing any work on myself. Right? It's kind of hypocritical. Another word for hypocrite is actor or pretender. And that's kind of what we're doing is we're pretending. We're pretending that we have our act together when in reality we do not. But we're pretending. And so with that in mind, what that does is that really also hinders us. And so basically what Jesus is saying is figure out your slice of the pie. Figure out how much you are contributing to the conflict and deal with your part. Hand them over to me. Let me work with them on their part. Because that's my role as Jesus, right? Because, the reality is, many of us also try to be God in somebody else's life to help them make the changes they need to make. But the problem is, none of us play God very well. So surrender them to him and let him do the work in their heart, because no matter how great your argument is, until they are able to recognize they're wrong, and only God can help them to be able to do that, really, you point out what's wrong, but then you deal with you. You deal with your part of the conflict and what's going on. And so that helps you to be able to grow. And just imagine this. Imagine if you are willing to work on your percentage, and then it comes back later where you're able to have a conversation with them. And if you were able to say, starting off, look, I know that we've had some problems, and I think it's important for us to talk about them. But before I get to that, you know what? I really want to apologize. I want to apologize because I realize, and then you share what you've been learning and what you're working on. Doesn't that change the approach of the conflict? Wouldn't it change their heart? If it takes two to tango, if one person's changing the dance, right, then hopefully it motivates the other person. Now, I do want to say this, though, is if you do take that approach, and I encourage you to do so, do not come with your agenda. And here's what I mean by that. Well, I recognize that I'm wrong, and I've messed up, and I'm so sorry. Because we've done that too, where I'll come and I'll apologize, and then when I apologize, then they'll recognize that they're wrong, and then they'll apologize, and then it'll be kumbaya. But then we apologize, and they don't apologize, and what? Now we got some more work to do because we are ticked again. So if you do take that approach, do not come from a perspective of manipulation and sharing the work that you've been doing. Some people are mature, and some people will be able to recognize, like, wow, I recognize the work that you're doing, and maybe I need to do some work, and maybe we can work through this together. Some people are not. They're not. And so as a result of that, please do not come in trying to manipulate. So share the work that you've been doing, but then if they recognize their part, great. If they don't, at least you've been doing some work on you. Now, there is a prayer that you can pray to be able to help you recognize the work that you need to do. And it's simply this. You can see it right on the screen. Heavenly Father, please show me where I was at fault. If you ever have wondered, does God answer prayer? There are certain prayers that God will absolutely answer. And that's an example of another one. God, who do I need to forgive? Many times if a name pops in your mind, that's God speaking to you like, hey, that's someone that you need to forgive. But here's another one. How was I at fault? And then when you recognize that you're at fault, don't become defensive with God. Well, be willing to acknowledge and look at what it is that you have done. And so as a result of that, maybe God opens up the blame pie and you realize that you're just 2% wrong. They're working at 2%. Maybe you're like, Ivory Soap, that they are 99.1% wrong, and you make up the other 0.9, the 9/10 of a percent. Well, then work on that. Work on that. And just allow him to continue to work in you. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 5, going back to that passage, it gives us a promise. It says, hypocrite, first get rid of the log in your own eye, then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. And so the reality is that as long as there is that element of work that needs to be done in us, it will also hinder us from being able to truly see the work that they may need to do. Our self-righteousness, our justification will always skew what it is that we're able to see in someone else. So that's why it's good for us to do the work in ourselves that need to be done so that we can be healthy, whole, and be able to heal as well. About maybe 2-3 weeks ago, Heidi and I looked in our backyard, and let's just say I don't have a green thumb at all. I don't. And a lot of the plants reflected my thumb. They were brown. The only good thing is they were dead, and my thumb is still alive. And so we decided to go to Home Depot and replace those plants. Now here, let me ask you this question. In order for us to replace the dead plants, what do we have to do? Yeah, we have to take the dead plants out first, right? We have to remove them. We have to make sure that we got the roots of the dead plant out. And then what we did is we put the new plant in, we put new dirt in, so now that the new plant can begin to work and grow and to develop. And I say that because it says this in Isaiah chapter 43, verses 18 to 19. It says, but forget all that. It is nothing compared to what I'm going to do, for I'm about to do something new. See, I have already begun. Do you not see it? I will make a pathway through the wilderness. I will create rivers in dry wasteland. Now, the reason why that passage is so important is because just before this, God is saying, look, I parted the Red Sea. I provided victory for you in the past, Israel, by parting the Red Sea. You crossed the Red Sea, and then, Pharaoh's army drowned in the Red Sea. Remember that song, Pharaoh's army drowned? So they drowned in the Red Sea. So you won this victory. But realize I am about to do something new. Many of you in this room, and whoever's watching on the live stream, maybe some of you are watching because God's been doing a work in you. You're here because your life has changed. You've grown. You developed. You've been able to face some things in your life. God has healed you. God has renewed you. God has strengthened you. Maybe some things that you recognize like, oh man, I need to work on this. I don't have the ability to be able to do it by myself. So God, will you give me the strength? And then God comes in and God gives you the strength to be able to do it. Some of you reflect those incredible changes in your life and praise God for that. But to you, God says this, I want to do something new. Never rest on the laurels of change that you've made in your life. I want to do something new. So let's find what are the dead parts of your soul. And many times, the dead parts of our soul are revealed through conflict and challenges, aren't they? Sometimes we don't know. I don't know that I have attitude. I don't know that I tend to fly off the handle. I don't know that I have a mouth like a sailor. I don't realize that until you tick me off. And then it's like, ooh, where'd that come from? And God is saying, well, now that 12.5% has been revealed, let's begin to pull that out so that now, and let's clear that out so now I can begin to place something new in you. I can begin to place humility in you. I can begin to place patience in you. I can begin to plant kindness in you. I can begin to plant compassion in you. I can plant mercy in you. I can plant grace in you. But we have to realize what the dead stuff is first. And so God said, look, I want to do something new. And so going through this conflict can reveal, like, God, this is an area where you could do something new in me. So I open myself up and I make myself available to you. And I think about that. So God is saying that I'm willing to do that work. God is saying that I'm willing to step in so that you'll have W-Riz and your life will be bussin'. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Part of me was like, Ken, don't do it. And my kids are thinking, my dad is so extra right now. But what God is saying, look, is I want to do something amazing. I want to do something amazing in you and in your life. And conflict can open the doors for us to be able to recognize, like, God, what is it that you want to do? And then when we open up, it's amazing the work that he can do when we trust him to begin to do that work. Romans 12:18 says something, again, really powerful. It says, do all that you can to live at peace with everyone. Another translation puts it this way. If it is possible, as far as it depends on who? You or me. As far as it depends on me, live at peace with everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on me, live at peace with everyone. If it is possible. Now, the goal of this series is to help us to get to a point to recognize that if we're willing to do the work, there's no regrets that we will have in doing the work that needs to be done so that we can improve. The goal is not reconciliation. The goal is to have no regrets. Now, in the process of doing the work in our lives, no regret living may open a door for reconciliation. But also, it's important to understand this, too, that for some people, it may not be wise or appropriate for you to try to go back and reconcile the relationship. That's something that you need to figure it out. For some people, it may not be. If you have someone that's abusive, you have to really think about that. But the question is, how do I gauge then? How do I effectively be able to gauge if it's wise or appropriate? See, the beauty of this is if I'm willing to recognize my 12.5%, and maybe what may happen is as I'm working on my 12.5%, I begin to realize, oh, my 12.5% I thought was, I just tend to rattle off. Oh, but I realize there's another 12.5% that I need to work on because sometimes when they're talking to me, I'm more concerned about making an argument back than I am really about listening. Oh, man, there's another 12.5% because when they tee me off, I really have some choice names that I call them. Oh, there's another 12.5% because I realize that, I get frustrated real easy. So when you start digging into this, and you start digging into the conflict, you'll begin to recognize that maybe there's more of a slice of the pie that you need to work on that will allow you to begin to be able to grow and to develop. And then what happens is as you start to work on that slice of the pie, now you can step back and you can honestly be able to assess, like, are they really as unhealthy as I thought that they were? Now that I'm becoming healthier, maybe I realize that maybe my lack of health caused me to skew their lack of health. Now, you also may realize this. Nah, they're screwed up. You may realize that. You may do the work in yourself, grow, develop, and change, and realize, like, no, they really do have some work to do. And in that situation, you may realize, like, they were abusive, but because I see where they are in their lives and they're not willing to do any work of themselves at all, then maybe I just need to step back. Maybe you come to the conclusion, because you've done some work in yourself, that you could recognize, like, they were abusive, but now that I'm in a healthier place, I can see the work that they're doing to try to change. And so maybe what I can do is I can go and I can approach and have a conversation with them. And you still get to determine the depth of the reconciliation that you can have with that person, the pace of the reconciliation that you can have with that person. And also, you get to determine what are some other things that you want to look for so that you can feel comfortable reconciling with that person. But maybe you're at a point where you can begin to recognize, like, wow, I still got some work I need to do in me as a result of that. But it helps you in those ways. And then also, you might recognize that they're semi-healthy, I'm semi-healthy, and we just got some work to do together. But here's the main point, and this is what I really want you to understand, and it's simply this. You can see this on the screen. The work of relational healing always starts with me. The work of relational healing always starts with me. If anytime you say, we can heal if you deal, right? Then maybe take some look at yourself. Because I've also seen it too, where I can be real with you. I've also seen it where someone I had a conflict with did some work on improving themselves, but I didn't do any work. And so when they approached me, I still saw them as they were. And as a result of that, I still kept them at arm's bay because I wasn't healthy. So that's also why it's so important for us to work on ourselves too. Because we never know, and this is important, you never know the work that God is doing in somebody's life. You never know the way he's moving. And maybe they reach a point where they now are genuinely ready to say, hey, I want to do whatever it takes to make this relationship right. Then hopefully we're at a point where we are healthy to be able to accommodate that and everything as well. But it does. It requires us to do some digging. There's a story that Jesus tells. And I never looked at it from this way at first. And then while I was writing this sermon, this passage came to me and I thought, oh, wow. I've never looked at it from this. but it completely applies to how we deal with conflict. And so here's a story that Jesus tells. In Luke chapter 18, verses 9 through 14, it says, "Then Jesus told this story to some who had great confidence in their own righteousness and scorned everyone else, who had confidence in their own righteousness, who thought they were what? Right. Who thought that they were right and scorned everyone else. In other words, scorned everyone else that they thought was wrong." Exactly. It says, "Two men went into the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee." Now, Pharisee, if you're not familiar with that, the Pharisees were like the religious leaders of Jesus' time. And they thought more highly of themselves as righteous than they really were. It was all about their performance and their ability to look right before God, and they judged everyone else who could not perform as well as they could. So that's the idea or the mentality of this person who is standing before God. So it says a Pharisee. And the other person was a despised tax collector. Now, just to give you a quick background for those of you who may not be familiar with a tax collector, you might be thinking, tax collection, why is the IRS so bad? Okay, so back in biblical times, a tax collector would be someone who would work for the Roman government. And what they would do is they collect taxes from their people. But what they would also do is they would take advantage of their people. So if the Roman government said collect 10%, because there was no regulation on them, they could say, give me 20%. And they would keep the 10, and then they would keep the 10 of that 20 and then give the other 10 to the Roman government. So these people were seen as like the worst of the worst of the worst. So that's why it says despised tax collector. It goes on, it says, the Pharisee stood by himself and prayed this prayer: "I thank you, God, that I am not like other people, cheaters, sinners, adulterers. I am certainly not like that tax collector. I fast twice a week and give you 1/10 of my income." It says, but the tax collector stood at a distance and did not even lift his eyes to heaven as he prayed. Instead, he beat his chest in sorrow, saying, "Oh God, have mercy on me, for I am a sinner." And Jesus says, "I tell you, this sinner, not the Pharisee, return home justified before God, for those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." Now, let's take this and apply this to conflict. See, we may not be religious in nature in our thought, but we can have the same attitude of the Pharisee. I'm right. I'm together. I am on the correct side. I am on the Lord's side in this situation. And the reality is, as long as you're not willing to do the work, as long as you have the log in your eye, and have you noticed people that are this way? All you will be able to see are the fault of others. That's all you'll be able to see. But there's something about the attitude of the tax collector who recognize, I've messed up. I've stolen from others. I've been wrong. And haven't you noticed this? That people who tend to recognize how wrong they are, like really recognize how wrong they are, and they go before God in admitting their wrongness, have you noticed they tend to be a lot more compassionate to others, kind, because they recognize, I was you. I was you. And they recognize other people, they're broken. Like I was broken. So it's easier to be compassionate when you recognize the brokenness of others because you see the brokenness in yourself. It's easier to be compassionate when you face yourself and you see how messed up you are, but yet God loves you anyway. That He's gracious and compassionate and kind to you and walk beside you and never give up on you and walk with you through your process. it really does change the way that you look at the world. It changes the way that you look at others. And most importantly, it changes the way that you look at someone else with whom you have conflict. It changes that. It changes that. Now, if they, like I said, if they're an abuser, what you might be able to do is be able to recognize, like, I don't think I'm at a point where it's healthy for me to have a relationship with them. But God, man, I see their brokenness. I see the way that they act is because someone was abusive to them. Obviously, in their past, somebody was abusive to them. And they repeated that pattern with me. So God, I pray that you would heal them of their brokenness, of their hurt, of their pain. You're able to be compassionate. It also changes, too, the way that you look at their lives. And you're able to look at their lives in such a way that where you're able to see, man, they're suffering right now. And it's because of the fact that they've been so broken. God, may this be the avenue that has a breakthrough for them. And again, you're able to look at your abuser from the perspective of compassion because you see the abuser's brokenness. And like I said, it'd be wise, most likely, for you to not step into a new relationship or try to reconcile the relationship with your abuser. But it certainly changes the way that you look at them. And in some ways, maybe it'll change the way that you look at you too. Instead of looking at your own fault, you'll be able to see, like, Jesus, you saw my impatience. You saw my attitude. You saw my ignorance. Yet you loved me anyway. And you walked with me through this anyway. And now I see where I was, and I see where I am, and I still got some work to do, but Jesus, thank you, because I've grown so much. And because you see you differently. You see you from the perspective of his grace, his kindness, his mercy. It begins to change, hopefully, the way that you start to see the world around you, the people around you, the brokenness that is around you. So as a result of that, here's what I want to encourage us to do over the course of this series. So last week we looked at the first decision that we want to make. This week we're looking at the second decision. So decisions that we can make that will repair a broken relationship. The first one is fight the urge to get back at by choosing to get back to. So watch the sermon last week if you missed that, so that it talks about that. And then today, as a result, I will own my own slice of the blame pie. So again, here at Encounter, we want to help you love up, love out, love in. Love God, love others, love yourself. So in loving up, here's what we want to encourage you to do, is let God uproot whatever hinders you and his new work in you. Let it begin to pull it out and work through it. I'm going to tell you it's uncomfortable. It is. It's uncomfortable. You know, I was pulling some of the plants out, like I scratched myself, I poked myself in a couple thorns. Like, there are some things that are in there that are like, ooh. It will be uncomfortable, but it'll be worth it. Love out. Discover your piece of the pie. Sometimes the most loving thing that you can do for others is grow and work on yourself. So discover your piece of the pie. And then love in. Start with the face in the mirror. Because it's going to start with you. And I'll tell you, if you're willing to do this work, and as you see yourself grow, you will look at you differently. You will. Because like I said before, you'll look at yourself through his eyes. And you'll begin to see that, God, I thought I was irredeemable. But you thought I was worth going to the cross for. It changes everything. Father, I just want to...